Welcome to the Mark Attwood Show, Adventures in the Cosmic Soup. Let's talk about money. But before we talk about money, don't go away because you're going to find this interesting. Remember that the best way to keep up with me, because there's a lot of censorship, I've lost one channel, blah, 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 is to go to the markattwoodshow.com. There's an email thing there. Sign up, get on my email list. Means you never miss any content. We're going to talk about money because lots of us in the awake community, shall we say, are not very good with money, are we? So I was very interested to get an email from Lawrence Rook, who joins me today, because Lawrence has written a book about it. How you doing, Lawrence?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, good. Thank you.
So we were talking just before we started recording, and you said what I think was really true. You're a therapist. You've studied Chinese medicine. You're a PhD. You said, look, lots of people in the alternative community are very good at looking after people, which is obviously what drives you, but not necessarily good at understanding money. And you approached money with skepticism and ended up writing a book. So let's start there and take it from there.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. I mean, from somebody who sees the world in an alternative way, let's say, like yourself, and having been around these kind of circles and these kind of groups for so long, I think that many of these people know, as you were just saying, how to take care of themselves in alternative ways by looking at alternative news. So they're protecting their mind from the mainstream. They're protecting their health by eating organic and not buying into GMOs. But I think that so few comparatively have looked into and understand how the money system works, and how once they have that knowledge and understand the corruption and how it's intrinsically set up, they can actually then step outside of it and benefit from it in the same way that they benefit in other ways. And, you know, right now with what's going on in the world, I think it's of paramount importance. And really, it just relates to being independent and being sovereign. And in order to have those things, money in the world we live in is such a key factor.
Well, most of my subscribers know that this is close to my heart. Sovereignty is one of my key drivers. I studied economics for 5 years, and for those of you who don't know, I've said this before. Nobody mentioned the fractional reserve banking system to me. When I found out about it, I was livid because I just wasted 5 years of my life, and I realized that money is the number one tool of our enslavement. And very few people actually understand how it really works. So when you contacted me, I was very interested in this. And when did you first decide to start investigating money as a subject?
So it was off the bat of everything going on with COVID. And when COVID first started happening, I was reading and just researching everything that I could get my hands on. And about 6 to 8 months into it, you know, you reach a conclusion and you realize that, okay, you see what's going on here. And then it was kind of, right, how do I benefit? How do we as a human race progress from this in a productive kind of way? And I think that so much of what happened with COVID and is happening with COVID can be understood from a financial perspective. I don't think it actually allows for everything. It doesn't incorporate everything that's happening, but 80% of it could be explained through a financial lens. So I started to look into that, and then when you start to research things alternatively, you actually find, you know, the mechanisms of the corruption are actually relatively simple. And then I knew I was onto something when I could speak with people who've been in finances their whole life and ask them questions that they couldn't answer very quickly. And basically, I wrote this book for people like myself prior to this, who had no real interest in finances and didn't really know how the system works, and to lay it out really simply so that anyone can understand in a layman's terms and what to do and how they can start asking questions and benefiting from it.
So where did your journey take you first? What did you first dig into? What was the big revelation for you? Because presumably before you started digging, you hadn't thought about it that deeply and didn't know that much about it. But you know, when you started digging, what was like, what?
Yeah. I mean, I think the real penny drop is understanding how inflation works. I think that's the really big component. And I think once people really understand what inflation is and what it's doing, then you can't really go back from there, and you can't see currency and the notes you hold in your hand in the same way. And there are lots of other kind of tangents from there, but I think inflation's really the key one.
Let's explain how it works then.
Okay, so basically what inflation is inflation is theft of your property. And the way to think about it is, if money is valuable, it's valuable because of its rarity, because of its scarcity. If anything is valuable, it's because it is rare, it's because it's scarce. And what happens with inflation is that central banks around the world get to arbitrarily print money, causing this inflation, therefore devaluing all other money that's in circulation. And what we've seen over COVID is an absolutely unprecedented speed of money printing. And there are horrendous statistics that go with this. But what happens is that whenever they say they're printing money, what it means is that the money you're holding becomes less valuable. So if you've got £10,000 in savings in the bank, and then the central bank of whatever country you're in prints however much, say they print 20% of the monetary supply, that means that your £10,000 is worth 20% less in its purchasing power. And this is what's been happening for decades. And ever since specifically we've come off a gold standard, there's been no hold bars on how they tax people with this kind of covert means, which is inflation. And there's more to unpack, which I can do as we kind of go along.
Well, you reminded me. I mean, the first thing that popped into my head, I studied economics for 5 years. The university side of it was rubbish. The sixth form side of it was good. And my first economics teacher was the headmaster of my school, Mr. Roberts. And he said, I think, I'll never forget this lesson. He stood there with a piece of chalk in his hand, trying to explain to us how Harold Wilson had decimalized the British currency in the late 60s. And he took the piss out of the fact that Wilson said on TV, and this will not harm the pound in your pocket. And then he said, and the following week, you couldn't buy a loaf of bread for this, because it totally devalued the currency and made everybody poorer. So inflation is really an instrument of keeping the poor poorer.
This is it. So it serves, you can look at different purposes it serves. So from a purely economic standpoint, they would say that in our fiat currency system, and let me just quickly explain. So fiat means by decree. It means arbitrarily by decree. And that's what we have. We have fiat money. And what it means is that it's money that's backed by nothing. So it literally, by its definition, is worthless because it's fiat. So it's got no intrinsic value to anything. But we're compelled to use it because the state is telling us what we can use as money or not. And I think all of it is a complete breach of our rights and our property, essentially, to even be, one, using fiat currency, and then two, they're the ones who get to print it. So, the analogy that I use, it's kind of like playing Monopoly with somebody, but they're the banker and they can pull as many notes into the game as they want and distribute it to whoever they want, whenever they want. And it's not even really an analogy because that is exactly what's happening. And the problem is that we're compelled to use fiat currency by law, yet they get to print it, devaluing everything that we have. And from an economic point of view, sort of traditionally, what they would say is that we need to have an expanding currency supply. We need to have inflation because then it encourages spending, and then it basically ends up paying back the debt. We also have a national debt that needs to get paid, and that's a complete, con, when I can explain that in a minute. But inflation therefore makes it easier to pay back the national debt, because as more money comes into circulation, it means that the relative value of the payment gets smaller and smaller as more and more money gets printed. But really, what I think this is all about is it's all about making the middle class and the poor poorer, because when you inflate the currency, it means that people have to work longer for the same products. So how many people can survive as a one-income family now? In the 1950s, most people were one-income families. And how long does it take to get a down payment for a house now compared to what it did 50 years ago? What does the average salary buy you in comparison to its goods and services that it did 50 years ago. And what you find is that just over time, the purchasing power of your currency is just being inflated away to nothing. Therefore, you have to work harder to get the same goods. And it's stealing your life. It's stealing people's time. It's stealing their energy. And it also creates this scarcity mindset, because everybody's panicking because they feel that their money's being taken away. Everybody can feel it to some degree. They can tell that things are getting more expensive now. And so everybody then becomes much more expedient with how they think about things. So it creates terrible things. It creates panic in people, and I think it creates a huge amount of stress. It's terrible.
Oh, it's an awful thing. I mean, I know people who've committed suicide over money issues. I mean, I personally don't take money seriously at all, but I know a lot about it. If anybody's watching this, a few things popped into my head as you were talking about that. When you mentioned the national debt in the UK, what does the national debt currently stand at? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't actually know. No.
No, it's a big figure.
I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, in the US, it exceeds. Is it
50
30?
trillion? 30 trillion.
Yeah,
It was 30 trillion
yeah. I
3 or
wouldn't
4
want
years
to guess.
But in the
Yeah.
UK, the national debt was known as the PSBR, the public sector borrowing requirement, and under Margaret Thatcher, so we're talking about 1990, that was 7 billion, and everything in the 80s was about, oh, we're going to reduce this, we're going to reduce this. Bullshit. They lied about it completely. They've just increased and increased and increased. And who's the money owed to? The money is owed to the central banks. And then you've got to ask the question, who owns the central banks?
Exactly.
And then you look at what Lawrence just said about money being based on nothing. When you sign up to my email list, you automatically get sent a PDF of G. Edward Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island, which I implore everybody to read, because that book explains how the Federal Reserve was created. And it involves the destruction of the Titanic, which killed most of the people that were on the board that tried to stop the takeover of the Federal Reserve in 1913. And weirdly, World War I happened the year after. And there's a number of other dates that everybody watching this should look up. Churchill was Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1926 when he took Britain off the gold standard. The gold standard is when the pound was pinned to something that had intrinsic value, which in this case was gold. And that obviously pissed off a lot of people back then, which led to, in the 40s, the attempt at bringing in a thing called the Bradbury pound. Did you find that in your research, Lawrence?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, which was the Bradbury pound was similar to what JFK tried to bring out and what Lincoln tried to bring out, which was greenbacks, which were silver-backed dollars, right? Dollars based on actual, and those guys both died, or allegedly died, funnily enough. And then you got to look at 1946. You got to look at the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II, which basically tied everybody to the petrodollar, which has been just disastrous for basically everybody in the world. And then you've got to look at Nixon getting out of the gold standard in the 70s from the US dollar. And then you've got to look at Gordon Brown when he was prime minister. He sold off pretty much all of Britain's gold. So literally, it's been this massive, ever decreasing circle over a long period of time with a long-term objective. From my perspective, what have you found, Lawrence?
I mean, I think you're bang on there, Mark. I mean, I'd add just a couple of other little things in there as well. I think JFK was trying to close the Federal Reserve as well, and yeah, and I mean, it's just such a mechanism of control. If you've got control of the money supply, you control everyone from it, and you've got everyone working for money, and then you've got this actual tax as well, which is in play. And some people are taxed 40%, and then they're taxed with inflation, and then they're taxed when they die and everything. And I mean, I would say that's bang on. And what I would then start to point people towards is how they can start to step outside of this system, because when you're dealing in fiat currency, when your money is in the bank, when your money's in the system, then you're funding them, you're voting for them. And banks are the biggest funders of government as well. So when money's in the bank, they're spending it. It's not there. And if people start to withdraw their money from the bank and put it into assets that are valuable and hold their worth over time, then I think that's the best thing that people can really do right now.
Yeah, and one of the problems with that is property, right? Because people think property is a good thing. But even with property, you don't actually own the property. It's the same with the car. You don't own
Right.
you bought the car, but you don't own it. But I just want to share this with you because this popped up while you were talking in my head, which I will pull up because you said something about who owns the money. So this is a famous quote from Mayer Amschel Rothschild: "Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who makes its laws." And it says here, so said Mayer Amschel Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty. What would he make of Bitcoin? The irony and the hilarious thing is that this magazine, which I used to read avidly, The Economist, is owned by the Rothschilds.
What would you expect?
Yeah, and this is the thing, because most economists haven't. I mean, when I started my economics degree, the first day I think somebody told me, or one of the lecturers said, yeah, this subject was originally known as political economy in the 1700s, after Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, I think it was, and it was known as the dismal science, because whatever you do with economics, it's always a bad outcome. Well, it is if it's controlled by people, and this is what people don't understand. So then you've got, and I think what's really interesting about what you said at the beginning about people who live, or who think alternative. I don't like the term alternative, because it's just about looking for the truth, right? But people who think differently to the mainstream find it, a lot of them, in my experience, and I'm just giving anecdotal experience, still have a left-right paradigm. Still have a capitalism's bad, socialism's good paradigm, which is all part of the trap that the Rothschild laid for everybody. Because the free market is the best way of distributing anything, but people associate that with capitalism because of the years and years of brainwashing, and then say, "Oh, it's a bad thing." The world is run by satanic communist psychopaths, right? And they control everything. And this is what I keep trying to explain to people. But what I like about where you're going with this, and the book that you've produced, is that it's really is time for everybody to start paying attention to what money is, because we're going to have to, things are changing financially. Whether you believe there's good things coming or bad things coming, it doesn't matter. There are things going to be massively changing financially. And you're taking, what I like about your approach is that you're taking firstly a skeptical approach to dig into it, but then a pragmatic approach about what where can I benefit from this? Because I think you're absolutely right that we have to take care of ourselves and become educated enough that we can be making good decisions about what to do, because we've got to feed ourselves, we've got children, we've got futures to think of, and currently we're still in a financial system, and that doesn't look like it's going to change in the very near future, but the nature of the system itself looks like it's going to change. So you've delved into all of that in your book, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you raised some really good points. I mean, wanting to make money has got a bad rap with alternative types, and I would consider myself to be one of those types. And I think it's basically because money wouldn't be my central value. Money's secondary. I much more care about relationships, etc., as you just said, and people care about creativity or whatever. But we need money, and in our world the way it is, there's no getting around that. And as you say, with the people that run the world, with who they are, you need to be savvy. And there is absolutely more control, more repression coming, and money is a key force for that. So people need to take autonomy and take responsibility for their money. It's funny what you said about your economic course. I've kind of got a tongue-in-cheek thing that I say, which is that the worst person to ask for the truth in any subject is a person who's a professor of that subject, generally.
100% true.
I mean, you want to find out the truth about, something to do with big pharma or whatever, you don't ask a doctor. And you want to find out the truth about something to do with Egyptology and who built the pyramids, don't go ask somebody that studied a PhD in it. So and I think it's the same with money. These economists, it's an indoctrination system, and they think that there has to be inflation. They think that there has to be fiat currency that runs it. They think that we couldn't survive on a gold standard, or we couldn't let the market come up with what is money. And of course, this is what it should be. And I think that money should be separate from state. And I don't think that the state should have anything to do with it, really. But quite the contrary to that, what we actually have is, as you say, we've got a communist system. Our money system is communist. I think it was either the 5th point in Marx's Communist Manifesto, which says the state will control all money and credit. And that's exactly what we have now. So it's farcical to even suggest really that we live in a capitalist society, like far from it.
Well, I've got to butt in. Karl Marx, I read Das Kapital from cover to cover, studied it, and I got one of my lecturers spent a whole year trying to mathematically break down relative surplus value, which is the key tenet of Marx's work. And I sat through these classes going, this is just, even back then when I didn't know anything, I was like, this is just bollocks. This is achieving nothing. But what it does achieve is you get a whole bunch of people that think they're economists with lots of squealy mathematical formulas proving absolutely fuck all. But when it gets really dark is when you realize that Marx was related to the Rothschilds, was sponsored by the Rothschilds to write that book, and is what I call one of the gatekeepers of the key tenets of information, along with Darwin and Einstein and other people like that, which become impenetrable things. Marxism itself is put up as a good thing because it's like equality and all of that. It's the opposite. It's the complete opposite. And if you look up Karl Marx, you'll find that he was a satanic poet, and you can find his poetry is full of Satanism. So, you know, Marxism, communism, and socialism, which is just a slight step back from communism, they're all as bad as each other, and they all end up with people in China. Communism ended up with people eating their own children. That's how bad communism is. Go and look into it if you don't know that. All right. So yeah. Sorry, I just had to pop in with the Marx thing. Marx is a little bugbear for me.
No, not at all. I mean, I completely concur. And it's done under the guise of virtue, isn't it? It's done under the guise of being a good person, and this is the moral thing, and this is kind of like a social justice. But
reminds you of something.
I mean,
else,
I think yeah, well, I mean, just everything. Exactly, yeah, everything that's going on is everything that's being done and you know, thrown at us is done under this lens at the moment, isn't it? And it's very effective. But I think that those traditional kind of axioms, they're really falling apart, those political axioms. And I think that the way that I kind of view it now is people are either a statist and they're pro the state, or they're pro the individual and pro the smaller state. And I think if anybody's pro the state at this current time, then, you know, that's worrying.
It's extremely worrying.
Yeah, to say the very, very least.
Absolutely. I mean, but the programming has been going on for such a long time. About 10 years ago, I remember being in a gym class discussing with the other people about the fact that they wanted to bring out a DNA database, right? And I just said something like, you know, this goes against all human rights to have to give your DNA into a database. And this one woman said, but if you've done nothing wrong, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, you're completely missing the point. You're completely missing the point, because who are you entrusting with this data? What are they going to do with the data? Who's watching them? And who's to say what they can say about us? And that's what she didn't get. She didn't get it.
So this is such a big issue, and I think this is where a lot of people and human psychology ends up stumbling, and that we generally, as a society, we outsource our power and we outsource our authority, you know, externally. We do it with people in white coats, we do it with politicians, we do it with experts, we do it with scientists, we do it with bankers, and we're always outsourcing and we're giving other people our power, and we're not critically thinking ourselves. And I think from a very young age, we're kind of taught and conditioned not to be sovereign and not to be able to take care of ourselves. And, you know, when you start seeing through the veneer of what our world and society is, you realize that you wouldn't want to go to a financial advisor for financial advice, and you wouldn't want to go to a doctor for health advice, and these things start to fall apart. And, you know, and then coming back to the money side of it here, I think, you know, so many people would question other fields and question other areas, but money, it still is kind of like this area that a lot of nice people don't really want to get too involved in, but it's essential because it's taking care of yourself, and it's taking your sovereignty back is what it is. And so Yeah, it's alerting people. What I'm trying to do is alert people to the risks of having their money in the system. And there are a lot of red flags that are coming up now. So I'll give another example. Money in a bank. When you deposit money in a bank, it's not legally yours, it's legally theirs, and they owe it to you. So a bank can do whatever they want with it. They spend it, they fractionally reserve lend it out, as you said, they gamble with it, they can put it in the stock market, whatever they want. But essentially, that money is then theirs. So then, if there's a run on the bank, which means that if everyone tries to withdraw their money at the same time, if there's any kind of like liquidity crisis or there's a financial problem, the bank can take your money. And this is exactly what happened as recently as Cyprus, I think, was the last place, you know, that we would all know in 2012. The
Called a
bail-in, this
bail-in,
is
isn't
it.
it? Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it, a bail-in, yeah. And I think it was anyone with over 100,000 euros in their bank account had the rest of it taken out by the bank, and they were given some kind of stock or something. And the bank's legal to do that. And if people keep their money in a bank, there's a risk there, and there's a risk
Well,
with
they
everything. If you take your money,
yeah.
yeah,
There's a really good YouTube channel, Mark Christopher. Have you seen him?
I haven't actually, no.
Yeah, he talks a lot about common law, and he put out a warning. I think it was at the end of July that in Ireland here they changed the banking laws so that I think it was from the 1st of October last year that the Bank of Ireland can legally bail in. They do it very, very cleverly. They send you their updated terms and conditions and they hide it. And I went through there 4 or 5 pages of the terms and conditions changes, and it's just a very small, innocuous line about negative interest rates, because that's the cover story for just taking your money and having the right to do that. And people just let them do it because they don't read it, because who reads the terms and conditions, you know?
And again, it's that trusting of authority. It's feeling like, well, I'm just small. What do I know? This is a big bank. They've written that terms and conditions. They must know, and I trust. And when you reframe your understanding of the world to realize that they are trying to systematically take away your property, they're trying to control you as much as possible, then you start to rethink things. And yeah, I think that's
I'm in that situation now, Lawrence. I'm thinking, COVID has frozen me, right? I'm like, there's no point me buying. I'm looking around going, is there any point buying anywhere? Is there any? I don't want a mortgage. I mean, the word mortgage means death grip in French.
that's right. Yeah, more. Yeah.
That's what it is. And mortgage in and of itself is fraudulent. They literally make the money up. They don't.
Yeah.
They're not lending you anything. You
So
already have the money.
let me just interlude quickly and just tell people how money's created, like in a nutshell, because again, like no one asks these kind of questions, and people in finances don't ask these questions. So there are two primary ways in which money in all kind of our major societies are created. One is through credit, which is exactly what you just described. So when you take out a loan, or when you spend money on a credit card, or you know whatever it is, that money is being created. So you're spending it into existence. And then the nefarious thing about that is that you're spending it into existence. You've just created it, but you have to pay interest on it. And if you don't pay the interest on it, well, then your car or your home gets repossessed by the bank. So what they do is they create money out of nothing, charge you interest for it, which is real because you've had to earn that. And then, of course, if you can't pay it back on nothing, then they take something real from you, which is tangible. And then the other way money's created, which is what we've seen, a deluge of, is through the relationship between central banks and government. So the government will issue a bond, the central bank will buy it, and then the central bank, in the process of buying it, creates that money from nothing, it money prints it, and then we as a taxpayer have to pay interest on that bond. So the central banks create the money out of nothing, and then they charge interest on it, which we pay for in income tax. And as you know, 1913 is when the income tax in America came about with the creation of the Federal Reserve.
Well, all tax is theft as far as I'm concerned, and governments need to be reduced by at least 90%, and they need to work for us, and money needs to be separated. And did you hear about the Reykjavik revolution in Iceland after the crash in 2009?
Yeah, I did hear about that. Yeah, but I wasn't sure how much of it was, legit or yeah.
Well, the bit that interested me, whether this is true or not, because obviously I've just read about it, I haven't been there and lived it, is that it was the women of Reykjavik that went out into the streets with pots and pans, and they literally banged the pots and pans for 2 weeks until the government resigned. And then when they did resign, they brought in they arrested the bankers, They were the only country to arrest any bankers. I think their later prime minister turned out to be corrupt, and they arrested him as well. But they did bring out a new currency after the crash. And what I found interesting about it is that the currency had social responsibility built into it. So if you wanted to borrow money off the bank to open a cafe, you would get that money based upon the fact that you would keep a piece of park opposite the cafe clean and tidy as part of your loan arrangement. So it was built into the money. I haven't looked into it any further since then, but that's the kind of solution that I found that's interesting, because I've looked at local bartering systems 30 years ago when I was in Florida. There were people trying to set up bartering systems and local money and it took me ages to get my head around it, and this is the thing, it does take, when you said earlier, you literally spend it into existence. I think a lot of people have trouble understanding that, and that's the big thing with money, because we've never really thought about it. And because we see coins and notes in our hand, and one of the things I really hate about this last 2 years, and I knew it was coming, is the debit card beep, just tap your card. And at the beginning it was 30 quid, now it's 50 quid. And if you're watching this and you're still tapping, right, and I do it as well, you're a fool, because everything's tracked and trace, and they're weaning you off cash. And cash is still the last bastion of freedom, just because of its lack of trackability. Although I hear that even the new notes in the UK and stuff are trackable. But anyway, it's a time for solutions, right? It's a time for education and solutions. So what have you come up with, Lawrence?
So yeah, I mean, it's about understanding the problem, and you're outlining it very well there. And cash is kind of useless, really, if you look at it over history. Every fiat currency historically has gone to zero eventually, or gone into hyperinflation. I think it's about 1 in 5 end up going into hyperinflation. And what we've got is a fiat currency. So it's no good storing your notes under a bed, under a mattress, because in 30 years, inflation at the moment, well, officially inflation's what, in the UK, 6%, is it near? And then in America, the latest official numbers are 7%, but in reality, it's far, far higher. Rent's gone up 30% in most places, food's gone up 50%, lumber's gone up 200%. So I'd say, as a conservative estimate, inflation is 20 to 30%. So unless your salary has increased 20 or 30%, you're losing money. Unless your bank is giving you 20 or 30% interest, you're losing money by storing it in the bank. So we're in a really problematic place here, where our wealth is being drained from us. And what you've got coming on top of that is exactly what you're describing about digital money, which is known as CBDCs, which stands for central banking digital currency. And what this is the central banks around the world are going to be digitizing the currency. So it's exactly what you say. It's trackable, it's programmable, and it's traceable. And that's really worrying, because what it means is that they can send money to you if you've been good, they can dock it if you've been bad, they can give you negative interest rates if you're either spending too much, or they can then, withhold your account or shut it or freeze it, block you out of the system. They can tell you to spend the money here or not there. And if you're a merchant and they don't like what you're selling, then they can, block payments from you. This is being rolled out in China. I think at the Winter Olympics, they're aiming for it. And all central banks are discussing this now. So then the question becomes, right, what should we put our wealth into? What do we put our wealth and our time into? Because if we put it into fiat currency, it's getting eroded. Do we wait until we can put it in these CBDCs and then the government can essentially control it? So we've got to think about, well, what is money and what is money outside the system? And what I propose in the book are 3 options for that, which are gold, silver, and Bitcoin. Each have pros and cons, each have limitations, and each could potentially have problems when the government is trying to do what it's trying to do. But for me, I think those are safer than having it in fiat currency.
Yeah, there's a number of things pop up there. I want to ask you firstly about, before we go into gold, silver, crypto, have you heard of the quantum financial system?
I've heard of it, and I've kind of, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you'd looked into that.
No, not in depth, in the sense that it could be something that comes out, in the future that kind of changes how things are run, but I wouldn't be able to comment.
Yeah. So well, that's the point. It's there's a lot of hearsay about it. There's a lot of people waiting for revaluations to happen. There's a lot of promises and dates. I try not to get involved in that, but I do watch it because it's interesting, because it does make sense to me that that is the way forward if we're going down the right track. But pragmatically, I've been going on about the fact that at the very least people need to get off state benefits, right? Because that's codependency, and the move towards things like universal basic income. Somebody said to me a few years ago, "That sounds like a really good idea. There'll be no more poverty." I said, "Well, sounds like a great. If it sounds like a great idea and it's coming from the government, you really need to stay away. You need to go back the other way, because they're very, very good at making things sound like great ideas, and then down the line, imagine the whole world on a universal basic income. Then the government has full control over your life."
And then what
100.
happens if you don't take your experimental medical procedure that month? Then what
Well,
happens to your
precisely.
basic income?
I mean, the thing that you're talking about, they're bringing into the China Olympics, the social scoring system that Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google, was the advisor on how to bring this in to disgusting communist CCP China. Not the Chinese people. I love the Chinese people. It has nothing to do with the people. I'm talking about the disgusting pigs at the top. Eric Schmidt brought that system in, and that is exactly what the vaccine passport was all about. That's exactly what COVID's all about. And it's not a new idea. You know, I put on my Telegram group a couple of weeks ago, my channel, a pop video from the 1980s that clearly showed that they were going to be putting chips in your hand and you had to beep in the supermarket, and if they didn't like you, they could just turn off the credit and that's the end of you. And they can they can turn you off. Why would anybody want to go into that system? So you brought up Bitcoin and you brought up gold and silver. Which one should we go for first? Because
Let's go with gold. It's got a bit of a steeper history, and I think it's the basis of it. So gold has been money for a long time, and it's money because of a few different reasons. But one of the primary ones is that people can't make it. So money has to be scarce, and gold is very, very hard to obtain. And people can, mine it at great expense, but really the gold supply only increases by about 1.5% every year. So it's also, quite strong. It lasts over time. So this is really why gold ended up being money, because of its scarcity and its durability. So gold has had intrinsic value for kind of longer than anything else that we know. And what we see as well now is that central banks around the world are accumulating gold very fast. China is accumulating gold very fast. And Russia has now, for the first time, got more gold in its reserves than it has US dollars. And the reason I believe that this is happening, from what I've been looking at, is that historically, whenever there's a collapse of a currency, the public lose faith, and a new currency needs to be introduced. And that new currency needs to be backed by something so that people have faith in it. And what it's always historically been backed by is gold. And what happened in Bretton Woods was that essentially after the war, America ended up having the most gold. And when they reset the financial system, because America had the most gold, it became the world's reserve currency. So whoever held the gold held the power. And what we're seeing now is China accumulating gold at a rapid pace. So they import more gold than any other country, and none of the gold that they mine ends up leaving. And there are estimates that it's got 10 times as much gold actually as what America has. And all of these big countries are accumulating gold. And when you see what's happening to our currency, it's being devalued, money printing happening. You look what's just happened to the lira, and you look at these other fiat currencies in history, and we're heading down that road. And if we continue doing what we're doing in terms of printing, then it will lead to hyperinflation. And then if that does happen, how do we get trust back in the currency? Well, it needs to be reset against something, i.e. gold. So for a long time...
If we have hyperinflation, we're fucked, because that's when society really falls apart.
Totally. But there are people who survive and thrive in hyperinflation. So in the Weimar Republic, 1 ounce of gold was actually enough during the hyperinflation to buy a street worth of houses. And in Zimbabwe, when hyperinflation happened, the people that had silver coins became kings
Yeah,
because
well,
all of a
I'm
sudden,
talking about the average person that doesn't know
the
anything
average
about this.
person,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. If
Well, I mean, I'm
hyperinflation
thinking
happens, it's
wheelbarrow.
catastrophic.
The image in my head is the wheelbarrows full of
Yeah.
Deutschmarks in the 1930s, you know,
This
or
is it.
20th.
This is it. And
Yeah.
this is the slippery slope that fiat currency, exists on. So if hyperinflation happens, which is a technical occurrence, what would you rather be having? Would you rather be having your money in, pounds that are being hyperinflated, or basically anything other than that? And I think gold is the tried and tested thing that will hold its value across time the best. But there are challenges with gold. Challenge being is that governments have banned it, and in America for, I think close to probably 50 years or more, gold was made illegal, and the government rescinded the right to people to own gold, and they only got that back in 1971. And they could put a tax on it. They could put an excess tax on gold and say, right, look, 70% tax whenever anyone transacts in gold. So it's not infallible, and there are issues with it. But if it was a choice between holding gold and holding fiat currency in the current environment or ever, I would personally choose gold. And then there are another a few little things with it, like discuss in the book. Gold has been discouraged in economic circles. They say it's a relic. They say it's got no use in a modern
Oh yeah, yeah.
society.
So if they're saying that, then you should do it.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
you've
yeah,
got to
yeah.
do the exact
Double up.
opposite to whatever they're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been contacting a few bullion dealers around the world and in the UK, and they can't get hold of physical gold quick enough for people buying it. Yet the price of gold is kind of flatlining, and the price of gold is very manipulated because that's controlled by the spot market and various things. But basically, there's a physical worldwide shortage of physical gold, physical silver. Central banks are buying it, and the price is still flatlining. There's real
Well,
price suppression.
yeah. There's a few things that gold pops into my head.
Yeah.
If you look at all the religious texts, they all have three things in common: slavery, serpents, and gold. They're in
Right.
all of, they're in all of them, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the work of Michael Tellinger, he talks
Yeah. I
about
know him.
the
Great.
Anunnaki coming to Africa
Mm.
and genetically engineering the human race for gold, to mine
Yeah.
gold.
Yeah.
Go and do your own research. If you look at Gaddafi was bringing out a gold-backed currency and withdrawing from the American petrodollar, which is why they garroted him. And Clinton said that horrible thing she said about him when he was brutally murdered in the streets. This is how importantly they take it.
Mm.
They
Yeah.
don't want us to
Absolutely.
know. They don't want us to have it. They don't want to know. Roosevelt put out notices across America in the 1930s saying, "Give us all your gold. Give the government your gold." We just, and people did. They just went and handed it in.
I don't think they do that anymore. Well,
No, I don't either.
some people would, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to be a fly on the wall of somebody back then who was like, "Fucking, I'm not giving up my gold. What are you talking about?"
Yeah. Well, they faced imprisonment. I think they faced a £10,000 dollar fine and imprisonment for it. So yeah. So
Crazy.
so gold. What would happen is that if there was a currency reset, and what would happen is that the real value of gold would then be brought forward, as the existing currency supply would then have to be backed by the existing gold supply. And I've read estimates that range, these are just calculations that range depending on how you measure the money, because how you measure money in circulation is actually quite difficult depending on which metric you take. But the price of gold, if that was to happen, would go from $10,000 range to up to $50,000, and it's currently about 1,800. So that would be a closer estimate to the true value of gold if there was to be a currency reset. And they've been talking about a great reset for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, yeah. Well, whichever way you look at it, there is a reset going on.
Absolutely, there is, yeah. And so what happens then is that gold becomes incredibly valuable, but so valuable that it's not actually going to get anybody out of a bartering sort of tight situation. And this is where silver comes in, because silver is more easily denominable in small amounts. And if you wanted to buy vegetables or trade, or if the fiat currency became worthless, this is where you really want to be holding silver. And essentially that is the value of silver. In terms of like some other kind of technical things, silver tends to outperform gold in a bull market just because it's got a smaller market cap. So there's more upside potential potentially. It doesn't hold quite so well in a market crash historically. So if there is a stock market crash in this great reset, then maybe the price of silver might drop, whereas gold might stay a bit more steady. But essentially, I think if one wants to be sovereign and account for all possibilities, holding gold as a wealth preservation and holding silver as barterability is sensible. And I think the risk would be not having it rather than having it.
I totally agree. The other thing is silver is possibly the most undervalued precious metal on earth right now. I think it's what, $27 an ounce at the moment, something like that. There are people talking about it being worth $10,000 an ounce in reality, because the value of it's been suppressed for so long. So I've been telling people since I started this channel, get some gold and silver. But then we're going to move to crypto, because crypto's fascinating. Just a bit of background for you guys. I've been involved in crypto since I first tried to buy Bitcoin in 2011, but I gave up because it was too technically difficult and I didn't have the time. But I did end up buying some Bitcoin in 2014, and I turned £750 into £50,000 very quickly. And then I ended up working in a crypto business in London for a while, and got to meet some interesting, I'll just say interesting people. What I've since learned about, for full clarity, I told my subscribers that I was getting completely out of Bitcoin about 6 months ago because I thought it was going to go to zero, and I still think it is. But Bitcoin's not the only crypto. There's lots of other cryptos. Let's hand over to Lawrence, and that's my very quick introduction take on crypto. I do think there are massive opportunities in crypto, in certain cryptos, regardless of what happens and what's going on. Because, for example, I think that I'm pretty sure that the SWIFT system has already been replaced by XRP because of the speed of international transactions. I do a lot of international transactions, and the speed of those has gone up a lot recently, like sometimes the same day, what used to take a week. So I'm pretty damn sure that SWIFT has already gone, but I can't prove it. If that's true, then the value of XRP as a coin, which is currently about 60 cents, I think, that again could be worth $10,000 each. So there are big potential gains, but it's all based upon, what I've just said is a very, very quick dip into it, just to let people know where I stand on this stuff. But what have you found, Lawrence, and what's your take?
So it's a really, really deep subject, isn't it? And what I do in the book is just lay it out as simple as possible, so that anybody can understand it without any technical expertise, and they don't have to dive into all the 10,000 different cryptos that there are. And I primarily talk about Bitcoin because it's the biggest one. And I think from what it's set out and laid out to do, it is the solution, or a very good solution, to the issues we've been talking about. So Bitcoin is defined by protocol as having only 21 million. Again, this is what it states. And that means that it is potentially the only truly scarce finite asset in existence. Even gold can be mined at 1 or 2% a year and a continued supply, and maybe there's more at the bottom of the ocean, who knows. But Bitcoin is fixed, which means it cannot be inflated away. In terms of ownership, I think it's the apex property in terms of ownership. The reason being is because nothing, I don't think, is more difficult to confiscate and ban than Bitcoin. If someone wants to take your gold, they can do it kind of by force, and that would be the most extreme way they can do it. But if someone wants to take your Bitcoin, they have to get the numbers from your head, and they have to get the code from you, and that is a lot harder than even just physically mugging someone, or if a government wanted to just take it. The other thing about Bitcoin as well is that it's kind of transnational, in the sense that you can instantly send it anywhere in the world, and you can travel anywhere in the world without actually having to hold it, whereas gold is cumbersome. You wouldn't be able to do that. So you could flee very quickly with any amount of Bitcoin, set up anywhere else in the world, and have all of your wealth right there, right then. So there are a lot of advantages by digitizing property that Bitcoin has. The question marks around it, which are many, basically comes because it's far newer. It's only been around for a decade or so. So how it performs in a market crash, I think it would go down quite a lot. I don't think it would be the hedge against kind of chaos that a lot of Bitcoin proponents would say. And I think currently it's actually going down a lot as well in relation to the stock market. But there are more question marks. It was created by a person who's anonymous, which is a question mark. And then I think if we look at the global picture of things, the state is trying to take us to a completely digitized society. And what crypto and Bitcoin could be doing is kind of coming in through the back door and getting people used to that digitized system so that then their CBDCs could be laid onto it and everybody's already familiar with the language, they're familiar with online wallets, they're familiar with digital payments, and it's all a nice seamless transition. So there is a potential that it could be a Trojan horse, but everything's got risks. And I think that the potential sovereignty that Bitcoin can bring, I think, is a risk worth taking.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different takes on crypto, but if you come back to the practical aspects of it, I mean, the thing that I know about Bitcoin that keeps me out of it, I'll just keep to myself at the moment. But the blockchain technology is not going anywhere. Okay, and blockchain, for those that don't know, blockchain is basically just an irrefutable ledger. So in effect, it means the end of theft, and it means the end of fraud. And there's, if you go again, going back to Mark Christopher's channel, I watched a very interesting video of his recently where he talked about non fungible tokens and governments all shifting to NFTs for their systems, which would mean, you know, and governments are the least efficient spenders of money and the most fraudulent and the most corrupt spenders of money on earth. Go back to what I said about all tax being theft. If you think about how much tax revenue is actually generated and how bad the roads are and the infrastructure and the military and everything, you know, they're not spending anywhere near what they take off us on things that we think they're spending on. Look at the state of your local school. I mean, it's just not there. So there's a lot of interesting things around that, and you know, true proponents, true believers in crypto who I've met, and I've met some crypto billionaires, and of course they're believers in it, they're billionaires, but they do truly believe that it's a way of getting rid of third parties, which is the state, which is banks, which is incredibly inefficient. So they are, and the amount of money, just with, as you said, with instantaneous transactions worldwide, the amount of money that saves in and of itself, the efficiencies and the lack of ability for a third party to steal. I mean, the SWIFT system, as I've referred to earlier, is for those of you who don't know, if I was to transfer money from Ireland to Lawrence in England, it would go into the SWIFT system and sit there for a couple of days and then be put into his bank account. While it's sat there, they can do what they want with it. They can trade it. They can make money out of it. If I send them 100 quid, they might make 1,000 quid out of it before they send it to Lawrence. It's one of the biggest sources of income for the cabal in the world. And it's just like, they're just creaming it off the top. XRP replacing that means that the money goes from my account, gets transferred into XRP, instantly gets transferred to him, and then changed into his currency and dropped into his bank account. No middleman, no peer-to-peer. So that, but XRP has a problem in that the true crypto people will say that, well, the problem with XRP is it was set up by a company called Ripple, and therefore it's not truly decentralized. So it gets more and more complicated. The deeper you go into it, it's a minefield of information. But I think, Lawrence, I'm just going to show everybody your book, Lawrence, so they can go and have a look at it.
Absolutely.
I think I think what Lawrence has done here is fantastic. Is go into this with an open mind, and then just start pulling together some truths so that you can get more educated, and then start making some decent decisions about what to do, because we're all in the same boat at the moment. We've all got to be thinking about, none of us really know what's going to be happening tomorrow even, right? So money is like super important, and I think this is a good starting place. So we put this page together for the book, and this is the ebook and the audio book that you've done, and you can get the ebook on its own, you get the audio book, you can get the bundle. So I'll put a link to that below the video. Very nice cover, by the way.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Sorry, Mark. Just to kind of interject, because you're raising all the important points, and it's about getting people questioning. It's about getting people thinking. And I've had people write to me after reading the book and said, "I'm all in on Bitcoin." And I've had people write to me after reading the book and said, "I'm all in on gold and silver." And they've gone away and they've thought about it and where they are in their life and what makes sense to them, and this is what they've come to the conclusion of. And you've got to know both sides of the argument whenever you're involved in anything, and people don't do that these days. And I want to get people asking the questions: how are they going to protect themselves if the banks were to have a bail-in? How are they protecting themselves against inflation that's happening at unprecedented rates? Where are they going to store their wealth? Where are they going to store their time? Where are they going to store their energy? And how are they going to pass that energy forward into the future? And these are the questions that I look at and try to answer, and absolutely encourage people to explore themselves as well.
Well, I think you've done everybody a great service by putting the book together. I'll put a link below the video, and really appreciate your time today. It was a fascinating conversation, and I'll probably get back on to talk more about it as things develop financially, because as soon as you print a book like this, it's out of date. You've got to go, because everything's moving so quick.
Yeah, I know. I tried to keep it as kind of conceptual as possible for that very reason. So, I lay out the principles and the history and the concepts of what money is, what value is, what wealth is, and what's required. So, yeah, but you are right. Things change very much.
Well, the acid test is, I'm going to get a copy of it and send it to my mum, and then I'm going to get her on to review it, and she understands it. We're on a winner.
Cool. Yeah, brilliant. Great. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Lawrence. And guys, thanks for watching. Take care.
Thanks, Mark. See you.